November 2019. I'll go ahead and call our meeting to order. With that being said, I will call on Wendy to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Wendy. We get to that point in our agenda this evening that we will have an invitation for public comment. Anyone may speak on any topic other than a matter that's in litigation, quasi-judicial land use matter, or matter scheduled for public hearing at some future date. Comments will be limited to 3 minutes. We only have 3 that have signed up, so I'll give a little variance this evening. I have cards here of those that have asked to speak. In order to encourage an environment of openness, courtesy, and respect for differing points of view, please refrain from behavior that is disruptive to the meeting, such as making loud noises, clapping, shouting, booing, or any other activity that disrupts the orderly conduct of our meeting. Abusive language will not be tolerated. So we would like to call Mike Burr to come up and speak with us. Mike, welcome.
Thank you. I believe you have printed copies of my comments.
We do.
My name is Mike Burr. I live at 956 Sampson here in McMinnville. Throughout my life, I've worked professionally and volunteered working with homeless populations. I'm currently part of the leadership of the homeless program at First Baptist Church. In the past, I worked with the CWISH program until it was closed down 2 years ago. 2 years ago, also participated in the task force of community, city, school district, and other community organizations that resulted in the expanding of the Gospel Mission Program and the closing of the CWISH program. And in that effort, the school district, I would remind you, contributed a couple mobile classrooms, and in the range of $500,000 to $750,000 was raised in the community to provide services for the homeless in McMinnville. During that process, there was great concern by community folks as to that the resources would be used to serve needy homeless. And it was only when such assurances were received that the CWISH program, which was very effective, was shut down. I'm here this evening because it appears that the Gospel Mission Program is not operating in a manner that addresses the ground of the at-risk population here in McMinnville. And in that sense, I refer to the chronically mentally ill. Last week of October, we had 5 days that were below freezing. And I was telling people to go to the mission, because that was the understanding that CWISH and the community had when we shut down. The first day, I learned that the mission was not open, and they weren't planning on opening until December 1st, no matter the temperature. Under some pressure, they marginally opened, not in a way that is very friendly to the homeless community, though. I had one woman come into the free feeding program who was borderline hypothermia, and if she had been out much longer, could have frozen to death. And that's not something that I want to see happening in our community. In response to that, First Baptist hustled, and we opened on an emergency basis for 5 days. we did have our administrative team had a meeting, and we met with community mental health. And the community mental health specialist confirmed our information that the mission is not serving the needs of the chronically mentally ill. The bottom line here is that something needs to be done. Good-hearted people worked and contributed their hard money to make sure vulnerable homeless people in our community would be taken care of. I have people in our congregation that gave large sums of money, and they aren't happy. And I'm sure that goes across the city. The city, the county, the school district, the churches, countless individuals contributed in good faith. The See-Wish program was working effectively, was disbanded. I don't think the mission has scammed us, but my anger at the vulnerability of the mentally ill sleeping on the sidewalks in freezing weather leads me to think in that direction.
About 10 more seconds, Mike.
Okay. What was promised has not been delivered. The fact that those beds are not available has meant that vulnerable people are at risk. Our police are being used as social workers. Our jails as temporary housing, expensive. The city needs to take prompt and immediate action to meet with the Board of the Gospel Mission, county mental health, the school district, local churches, and other advocates to make sure that the facilities created by this community are in fact being used at their highest and best. And I would note that it hasn't helped that the city's homeless task force has canceled its last two meetings, so these issues haven't been able to be addressed there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike, and thanks for your presentation on paper so that we could.
I sort of rushed through that, so would just say that I'm available for conversation. Our leadership is available. If you have questions, more than happy to respond.
Thank you, Mike.
Mayor, I did have one clarifying question for the record. Mike, how many days during the cold weather snap was that you would have expected the mission to be open? Do you believe that it was closed?
Well, they were closed the first night, and the rest of the nights they said that if people called at 8:30, they could come at 9, which is totally unreasonable for that population, for the chronically mentally ill. Plus, it's not possible for those people who have physical disabilities, or for those people who don't have phones.
So I just want to understand. So October 28th, they were closed.
Right.
And then for the remainder of the week, it was more of an appointment only.
Right. Okay. That's my understanding.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Doug Johnson. Welcome, Doug.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you this evening. My comments are in the direction of our city growing as an inclusive community that celebrates our diversity and our variety. How would it feel if for a whole year, every single quote or reference in the paper was from Zach or Scott or Sal or Adam? I imagine to be erased doesn't feel good. Now, I'm a white male, secure economically, so I don't experience that erasure very often. But I imagine it doesn't feel good. You're probably acquainted with the promotional video, McMinnville, Oregon, Welcome to the Land of Plenty. It's on the Visit McMinnville site. I've previously seen that video and didn't think much of it one way or another until a friend of mine made some comments about the video that were not too complimentary. So I went back to look at that video again and again and again. And I was taken back. I said, oh my, there's a problem here. This video seems to run entirely counter to one of your goals as a city council, that of a goal of being inclusive. How so? So we're treated to various images and quotes like, the hills are alive with the sounds of mushing grapes, ridiculously tasty food. Veggies we serve farm to table are just so damn big. Who brings those in? And the farm laborers shown who bring this bounty out of the fields? A blonde female harvesting a bell pepper, another white female delivering produce, oh, and some gloved hands harvesting grapes. Really? Really? Is that who's bringing this bountiful, and we live in a bountiful place. Is that who's bringing that in for us? This is to be erased. This is a whole subset of our community being erased. And that very well be quite offensive to them. Here's another quote. Lest you think we are one of those snobby white towns, think again. Snobby wine towns, pardon me. So what images follow this? Well, we've got a white male working in a winery tasting wine, followed by another white male soaking in a bathtub, drinking, I'm not sure, I'm not an expert on this, scotch or bourbon. Most of the eating scenes with virtually all entirely white folks are drinking wine. I heard you. We've got another quote, sounds of girls' weekend in progress. All white girls. So a message I take from this video is, this is a town for white folks who drink wine. Where's the celebration of our diversity? Thai Country, Pura Vida, Tequila Grill, all fantastic places. Where's the celebration of that? Why not Sabor Latino rather than the Alien Parade? Just a thought. And finally, why not our youth soccer program rather than a staged elderly white woman with, I'm not sure if it's a ukulele or not, on her porch? Why not? Visit McMinnville. They've begged for no cut in their funds. Yeah? They're representing our town. But the goal seems to be to draw those who will spend the most money on a per night basis. Marketing people are going to do what marketing people do. They got their metrics. They're going to try to drive revenues. But they have literally, in this video, erased the entire Latino population of our community. There's no sign. I think this is diametrically opposed to one of your goals as a council to foster an inclusive community. We all have implicit biases. Those exist. But that doesn't mean that we should be complacent. I believe this calls for the council to think critically about, again, the kind of community we want and how we're going to get there. If it's a white wine town, then I think the video accomplishes your goal. But if money is the driving force, if per night expenses, per night spending drives it, we will most assuredly not even move forward as an inclusive community. We will continue to focus entirely on drinking wine on 3rd Street to the expense of the variety of our community. You can't get it away from it. If you focus on money, we're going to have a white enclave. I don't think that's the kind of community you are looking for. Thank you again for your ears, the extra minute or two. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Doug. Jan Montgomery. Welcome, Jan.
Jan Montgomery, 51-year resident of McMinnville. Topic, air show, traffic. I've talked to several neighbors and friends who really enjoyed the air show. I've spoken with council members, the mayor, county commissioners, and all point back to the planning people from the air show. Quote from the News Register: "The show ultimately didn't cost the city anything to host. It cost me a totaled car. The downpour and the water on the highway was no one's fault. But again, as the News Register said, which wasn't much, the highways were a little messy. In fact, they were awful. I witnessed 3 more terrible crashes while I was getting my car cared for. The officer who took our information said, 'You will have to go to DMV for forms. I've already serviced so many crashes, I have none left.' There were large trucks with flashing yellow lights that said, 'Caution, wreck ahead.' They moved from crash to crash. I would still like to know how many crashes there were. It was terribly unreported. There seemed to be a good number of officers, and the hospital told me that they had been forewarned. The problem was that there was no traffic control for the highways entering Highway 18. They were backed up beyond sight, and 18 was one solid stream of cars. When there was a small opening, these other streets, highways, would try to get out. Hydroplaning occurred a number of times in relation to that. Crookshank Road, Hopewell Road, Dayton, Lafayette, and Ash Road should all have had officers doing traffic control to let these people safely enter Highway 18. I have no objection to another air show, but I strongly recommend traffic control in these areas and probably where the guests enter and leave the air show. As PS, I donated my very ruined vehicle to the fire department.
Thank you, Jan. That takes us to our presentations this evening. And our first presentation is from the Oregon International Air Show. And so, Bill, would you come forward and share your presentation? You can bring your group with you. We've got 2 chairs, and we can bring a few more up if we need to. Bill and Faith, and we've got 2 others, so welcome.
And Mayor Hill, Council, Mr. Towery, we first would like to thank you for allowing us to come and say a few words about the air show and make our presentation. With the former speaker, we would like to agree and invite her to come help us with the planning. We do think that the traffic planning was probably the weakest part, and we have some work to do to definitely improve that. So I appreciate those comments that we heard earlier. With me today, I have Tony Hahn. He's one of our board members. He's also airport manager at Albany, as well as Malino. Yes. Greg Zuthan is our incoming board chair, and Faith Stanfield is our marketing director, and I'm Bill Brock.
air show, after we got formal approval in late June, we had a quick run in to get ready and pull off our event and host the Royal Air Force Red Arrows. McMinnville was one of a small number of stops in North America. They've never been to the Oregon International Air Show in our 32-year existence, and they've never been to the state of Oregon ever. So we were pretty humbled and honored to be able to host that team here in Oregon and right here in McMinnville. But we couldn't have done it without the support of the city staff, from fire, police, public works, everybody that worked with us to pull this off and make it as successful as it was. We also had some key partners that allowed for us to take care of the business side of the air show, which also allows us to do our charitable mission. Some of those included are the Stoller Group, which is the Stoller Family Estate, Zenium, Express Employment Professionals, the Springs Living, Potcake Aviation, Linfield College, First Federal Savings and Loan, Recology, a new partner of ours, allowed us to take our event and work towards a zero waste event. They worked with us to eliminate things like straws, plastic straws, aluminum foil, things that we have been using for numerous years, like most public events unfortunately have been. Evergreen Aviation Space and Space Museum, huge partner of ours. Not only were they able to help us with our evening event, but also from a volunteer effort and then supporting us in just the overall parking effort. Kit Johnson, one of the tenants on the field, TTR, Willamette Valley Medical Center, McMinnville School District, Precision, and Tour Divine, all companies that located there adjacent to the airport that were incredibly supportive. The hangar tenants at large, we met with them on a couple different occasions to answer any of their questions, but they were very supportive. We came on their airport, disrupted things for several days, and we saw lots of happy people each evening after the event. We met with several community members and business leaders throughout the process of establishing the air show, all of which were supportive. They had questions, certainly, but were overall supportive. Mr. Paul Peterson, he's attendant on the airport, was also very helpful. Mark Siegel and the Delphian School supported us. Dr. Russell in the school district. We started in August by putting her in one of our aerobatic airplanes so she can make a video to welcome her teachers back to campus or back to the schools. That was quite the effort to watch her strap on the airplane and put headsets on over her wonderful head of hair, and then watch the video as she tumbled through the sky. It was wonderful. We had over 200 community members from Yamhill County that came out and volunteered over the weekend. As a nonprofit, we couldn't sustain or support our charitable mission if we didn't have volunteers to come out and help us execute the air show. We've had several groups already receive cash donations from us. McMinnville High School Student Rotary, the high school cheerleaders, the 2020 grad party, American Legion Post 21, Ageless Aviation Dreams, which is a partnership program with the Springs Living, the Mighty Endeavor, which is a veterans program. The list goes on. I would take up probably the rest of the evening if to cover all of the folks that helped make this air show a success. We definitely have heard a lot of positive. We've received a lot of feedback from community members. We've had lots of questions about the next step, the future shows, and all of that is currently in the works, and we look forward to working with city staff and the business community here locally to answer those questions, which we were not prepared to answer tonight, but we do want to thank the City Council. Part of our presentation tonight is to present to each of you our 2019 Air Show coin. Because we are the Oregon International Air Show, our coin is in the shape of the state of Oregon, but this year, after 31 years, it did take a different look because it does not have the city of Hillsboro's logo on it. It has McMinnville on it. It also hosts the Spruce Goose, which is a big part of this community in Yamhill County, as well as all of our performers that performed at the air show are also part of that. So if we could, we'd like to present that to each of the council members.
And while you're up there, we've got our challenge coin for you. So I have one for each of you. So we'll do the exchange.
Thank you. Yeah. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Bill, appreciate it. Faith? Why don't we see if we have any questions or
One last thing. One item that we have always presented to our host city is just a litho of our poster of that year. And this is, if you walk in the chambers or the council chambers in the city of Hillsborough, you'll see 31 posters. Number 32 is here. Thank you, Bill.
I'll hold this up. Anyone have any questions for Bill or the group? Go ahead, Adam.
Have you guys had your formal debrief meeting with all your partners and agencies and things like that? Did all that go as planned from everybody else's perspective? I mean, you were very positive about it, but other agencies involved?
All of them is a pretty broad question. We have started the process. We've met with the city. We've yet to meet with ODOT. That's one of our important debrief items. We're walking through the process of meeting with sponsors and key stakeholders. That takes some time, so that is underway, yes. We've not met with all of them yet, no.
And then attendance, did you guys hit projections on that with the weather you had on Sunday and things like that?
You know, surprisingly, Sunday, a lot of people still showed up, and I was shocked. We had a little over 7,000 people that showed up on Sunday alone. So it was Saturday, for example, we were right at our maximum of 10,000. So it was given the weather, we were still pleased with the event, attendance-wise.
And how this air show was shrunk down on purpose from your Hillsborough operation, was it still a worthwhile and profitable endeavor for you guys? You've mentioned charities you've given back to, but I mean, all in all, you're net positive?
Yeah, we're pleased. We as a charity, because that's our primary mission, we would love to have had blue skies and zero clouds on Sunday, which would allow for even additional revenues to be able to donate. But that doesn't always work out. If we look over the 32 years, we've had some years that were perfect air show weathers, and we've had other years that were worse than what we had, where it rained all weekend and attendance was just horrible. But we plan for that. We know that in the Northwest, even if we're in middle of June or August, it can rain. So we plan for that, and so with all things considered, with the scaled down show, with the weather, we're still pleased, and we're still working through all the final numbers, but I think we're still in a very good position.
Thank you.
Sal?
Thanks, Mayor. First, thank you for coming to present to us, and thanks for putting on a successful show. It seemed to be very positively received by most of the folks in our community. I did have a couple of questions. My understanding is that any kind of complaints or issues related to the air show would be directed to a line that the air show manages, not the city. How many calls did you guys get, and what were the what were some of the more bigger issues, I guess, that came through on your call line?
We call it our noise line. We typically, every year at Hillsborough, we get calls that are related to noise, and that was not any different here. The total number? Okay, so about 24. One individual that was not happy with us, one of the ride providers, the helicopter provider that was flying the same route, called about a half a dozen times himself. We debriefed during the middle of the weekend with the helicopter operator. They changed their route, and that seemed to fix that. Our thought process going into a new site was that we would receive more just because it's something new. But that was the general census was noise.
Thank you.
Other questions? Remy?
I just want to tack on to that I don't know about the rest of you. I received telephone calls all throughout the day with complaints about noise. So I'm not, disregarding the great things that the air show did, but certainly, my phone rang off the hook all day with complaints. And I received a number of email complaints as well, both about noise and then also about pollution. And those remarks about pollution were coming from a couple of different areas. Received some concerns from farmers outside the city limits who had crops that the planes were flying over, and they were really concerned about particulate matter. And then, of course, circumstantially, the air show, fell on the same day in which there were, worldwide protests in regards to the changing state of our climate, and so I also received a fair amount of feedback that this was not just noise pollution, but we were creating air pollution and unnecessary use of fuel and things of that nature. So I received also a couple of emails of people saying how much they appreciated the event. As is the nature of it, I tend to receive phone calls and emails when people aren't happy with something rather than when they are. But just for your own information, if you are kind of collecting that kind of data, I don't know exactly how many emails it is, but it's all public record, so it could be found out. And it was a busy day. The air show was a busy day for me in terms of receiving complaints.
Thank you, Remy. Any other comments or questions?
I guess I just do have one comment, because I don't know if you're aware of it, but I did learn on social media around the time of the air show that there was a lady who had an older horse, and her property was buzzed a little low, she felt, and the horse died. It got tangled in the fence. And I'm not putting that on the air show. But I do think that making sure that, since it's in a bit of a rural agricultural area, next year, anything you can do to make the neighboring properties aware of the date and that it's coming and that it will impact livestock might be helpful. And maybe you did a lot of that outreach before this, but
we certainly did, and in that case, we empathize with the owner, and we did reach out. The most disheartening thing with that was how social media treated her. If we could have affected that, which we had no control over, but people were not real nice to her on social media. I did leave all of my information, my personal information, and we did not hear back from her.
I appreciate you doing that.
As to the noise, I serve on our ICAS, our International Council of Air Shows Board of Directors, which is an international board, and we know that across the country, across the globe, there are people who are not necessarily as interested in flying things, and the effects or the the noise that air shows do cause, but on a different note, I'd like to go on record and also point out that we had numerous autistic children with families with autistic children at the air show, where they actually used the noise as a form of therapy, and that's not just germane to our event. That's something that happens all over the planet with loud type of events where families that have severely autistic children, it helps them desensitize as well. So there are some good aspects to that noise, but we also appreciate the reality that not everybody likes the noise. And I'd be happy to address, if you have any of those emails and would like for us to address them, please feel free to forward those to us.
Other questions or comments? Zach?
I would just, as you go forward, whether you do it in McMinnville or not, encourage you to pursue the zero waste and perhaps push your event even further, and given as much gasoline as you consume, any way you can get more carbon neutral, the better for an event that has good benefits, but also perhaps some negative benefits in our changing climate. And then put in my request that if you do it again in McMinnville, that Mike Wiskus in the Lucas Oil plane comes back.
Yeah, Mike is definitely one of our favorites, and just some technical aspects. The smoke that you see coming out of our, like Mike Wiskus's airplane, it's not a petroleum-based product. It's a very friendly product. It used to be years ago. They just took oil and made a product and they would pump it out into the sky, but that's not how it is anymore. Certainly the fuel that is used to power the aircraft, that's normal fuel, but thank you for the comments.
Well, from my perspective, I just thank Bill and Faith, because I interacted with them quite a bit. I had the opportunity of spending over half a day on Friday, all day Saturday, and all day Sunday at the show. And I wasn't one that was in a tent, but I wanted to make sure I was out and about. I think I talked to every vendor 3 times each day and tried to get a sense of, how they felt, and got real positive reinforcement as I was out talking to citizens, not only of McMinnville, but the Tri-County area, because it has quite a reach. I was just really impressed with the professionalism that the Oregon International Air Show has, and your years of experience really showed, I think, from my perspective. I know we had a smaller window of time to get prepared, but being inside and watching the workings of that and how we were able to utilize the total space of the airport was amazing to me. Again, I received a number of calls. I tried to respond to many of those, but I also received many, many handshakes of thanks for what was brought to our community. The one aspect that we haven't talked about, we alluded to it, but we had maybe well over 1,000 students that came on Friday from our schools that were able to have an educational experience from my perspective. Teachers could prepare, talk about flight. They were able to watch all of this, and then many of them headed over to the Delphian School exhibit that had flight simulators. They had hovercraft and planes and all kinds of things. As I talked to Mark Siegel, they had a phenomenal experience of sharing what the students up at Delphian are doing. And matter of fact, we've made a connection that their flight simulators are going to be utilized out at Evergreen. One last thing that I can share is that on Saturday night, as we had the VIP and the sponsors and all the flyers together, and we sat under the Spruce Goose for dinner, and to hear these pilots that are world class talk about they had a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to eat under the Spruce Goose. That was amazing. I saw more excitement and passion in just that group that evening. So again, Bill, thank you for the opportunity to let us host this 2019, the air show. And, you know, we hope that we can further that relationship from our perspective, learn, make it a better, bigger event. You'd shared with me that the pilots just love this location. That box is tremendous. And I think on Saturday we really saw that. I think the F-35 on Sunday that came so close because they wanted to make an experience in that short period of time that they had, whether that be 10 or 15 minutes, was just, it just shook the whole body. That was quite an experience. So that's my perspective as one that was on the ground with you, and I appreciate it. It's something I'm going to remember for a long, long time. So thank you, Bill.
Well, thank you. And my final comment, I would just like to thank your city staff, Mike and the staff at Public Works, allowing us to invade their turf. We appreciate that. City Manager Towery working with us, walking the steps to get to that weekend. But most importantly, we can't have an event like that and bring a lot of people to town and not make sure that it's a good, safe public event. So my hat's off to Chief Scales, from a law enforcement perspective, working with all the different agencies to make sure that we had eyes in the sky. We had eyes all over that field to make sure that it was a good, safe event. And then also, Captain Hannafan, I know you're the rep from Fire, but the fact that they were there, I'm so pleased that we didn't need your services. You were a spectator a whole lot of the weekend, and that's what we like to see. But the professionalism in which Fire approached this event was important to us. It was also very important to all of our performers, that they knew that should they need those services, that they would be taken care of. So kudos to you, to all of your staff that helped make this happen, and it did make it easier for us when it came go time over the weekend.
Any further comments or questions? Bill, thank you.
I'd like to just say one thing. Saturday was fabulous. And I know many people thought it was.
It was definitely the day to be there.
Absolutely. Thanks, you guys.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
We have a second presentation this evening from our Historic Landmark Committee, and this will be their annual presentation. So Chuck Darnell, our senior planner, to present. Chuck, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and councilors. Hold on one second. All right, so this evening I'm providing an update on our Historic Landmarks Committee, just an overview of their work that's been completed over the past year and some things to look forward to in the coming year of 2020. So just a quick update and reminder of the HLC's roles and responsibilities. So they are responsible for administering and managing the city's historic preservation program. Our committee members serve an advisory role to the Planning Commission and the City Council on historic preservation matters, and they're the decision-making body for land use applications related to historic preservation and also our downtown design review area. So taking that a step further, they manage our historic resources inventory, which is our list of properties that are designated as historic landmarks in the city, of which we have over 500 properties that are listed on that. They review alterations that are proposed to those historic resources to make sure they're preserving the historical character and of those properties. They're responsible for conducting surveys and studies related to historic preservation, and also to just raise public awareness of historic preservation and the benefits that it has in our community. So our current HLC members are Joan Drabkin, who's been our long-standing chair, Mary Beth Branch, John Mead, Mark Cooley, who's with us tonight in the audience, and Heather Sharfeden. And this group's been together, I think, for 2 full years now, at least. And they've been a really great group, a lot of experience, both with just local history here, also architectural and design experience, and contractors that are familiar with historic preservation work. So it's a great group to have working on this committee. This is just a brief snapshot of the 2019 work plan that the committee had put together and what they were working towards over the past year. And in 2019, they met 10 times. They meet on the fourth Thursday of the month at 3 p.m. They did just recently change their venue, so they meet here in the council chambers now. It was decided by the committee that since they were holding public hearings and hearing land use applications, that it sometimes was difficult in the community development center in the conference room for that format and that type of review. So we moved the meetings here, and overall I think it's been positive, and people enjoy the meeting environment here in this room. So they reviewed 8 land use applications in 2019, which is not a ton, but there were some larger projects that took quite a bit of review and focused review by the committee, and I'll touch on some of those here tonight. Some other items that they completed in 2019, one was something that you saw in early 2019 was the adoption of the Historic Preservation Plan. The committee worked on the bulk of this throughout the course of 2018, but finalized it in early 2019, and it came before you in April and was adopted. So that was added to our comprehensive plan, and it provides, the biggest component of it is it provides a framework for activities for the Historic Landmarks Committee to work on for the next 15 to 20 years to move historic preservation forward. Another activity that the HLC participated in was the This Place Matters campaign, which is a national campaign to raise awareness of historic resources. But this year we kind of used our McMinnville Matters format to share some photos and stories. This one on the top is our committee member John Mead in front of his house, and he did a little blurb about the Newbie house is where he lives. So it was an interesting way to share information and get some public feedback on historic resources. So now I'll just touch on a few of the different applications that they reviewed over the past year. A lot of the focus this past year was in the downtown area. We had a lot of investment going on there, and applications that came before the Historic Landmarks Committee. So this one is a new apartment building on at 1025 Northeast 1st Street between Johnson and Kirby. This one is in the downtown design area, right on the very southeast corner of it, but it's within it. So the applicants came up with a building design that met the majority of the downtown design standards. And this will be a 16-unit apartment building that's currently under construction now. One larger project that came through was a request for a demolition of a building on 3rd Street, which was a pretty difficult application to review just because of its location within our downtown historic district that's listed on the National Register. But the applicant came to the committee with a pretty extensive report that researched the history of that site. And determined that the building that existed on the lot, which is the picture shown on the right, was not actually the original building that existed on the site, which you can see in the photo on the left. It was a different building that was constructed actually prior to the main Taylordale building on the corner. And the applicant documented all of that, did an analysis of Sanborn fire insurance maps, which are the old maps that identified improvements on properties for insurance purposes, and made their case to demolish the building. So that was ultimately approved based on that research that was provided, but that was a larger application that was reviewed by the committee. But they were very thoughtful in how they reviewed it against the review criteria and asked a lot of good questions, and I think required the applicant to put a lot of research and good findings together to support their request. Concurrent with that demolition review, they reviewed the new construction that would be constructed in its place. So I'm sure everyone's seen that building is gone now, and so it's moving towards the new construction that will exist there. This is the building that was approved and the design that was approved. It's the darker gray building in between the Taylordale building and the building next door, and also a rendering of that. And this was proposed as just kind of flashing back that they designed the storefront ground level windows and doors to match the historic building that existed there previously before the most recent building was there. So that's the design that was approved, and that went through both for historic landmarks review because it's in our historic district, and also through downtown design review. Another larger scale redevelopment project in the downtown that was recently reviewed was the First Federal property. They came in with a proposal to basically redevelop their entire block there on First, between Second and Third and Adams and Baker, with a new 3-story office building. It's outside of the historic district, but it's within the downtown design district. So it went through that review process. And this is the building design that was approved. There have been some minor changes to the exterior based on conditions of approval, but this is the rendering that was provided for the committee's review. Again, that's a larger scale redevelopment project, so it was a pretty thorough review, and the committee did a very good job of going through each of the downtown design standards in great detail, and there were some waivers that were requested, and they analyzed those pretty thoroughly during the review process. This just shows the overall site, and that this project will be kind of a complete reconstruction of that block, reorientation of the entrances on the property to help traffic flow as well, and reconstruction of the parking lot. And then just recently at their last meeting, this is more of just a smaller scale historic preservation project, but they reviewed an application for some updates to a historic home and construction of a new detached ADU. So it's a home on Washington Street. You can see in the top left corner, it's been fairly well preserved throughout time, but there have been some changes. Some windows and things have been replaced. The current proposal is to put some of those original materials back in, so replacing wood windows with, or replacing existing non-conforming windows with wood windows that match the historic home. And then they're proposing to build a detached garage with an ADU above it that right now will function as just a long-term rental in that unit. And they did a good job designing the building to be to complement the historic home in the lot. So there's just an example of a few of the types of applications that the committee reviewed and the types of things that are coming through across their desk for review. Upcoming in 2020, the committee's still working through their work plan, and they'll be finalizing that here in the coming months. But a few of the big things that will definitely be included are going to be related to some grant-funded activities that the committee was able to secure. I think, as you all know, we are a certified local government, so that makes us eligible for some grant funds that are available through the state, which we applied for last year, and we received $11,500 to complete some of this work. So with those funds, we'll be completing a reconnaissance level survey. We'll be doing some updates to our historic resources inventory materials, and also doing outreach to property owners. The photo on the right shows our current historic resources inventory maps, which are kind of cool because they're hand-drawn and they're from the 80s, but that's the only version that we have of them, so they're not all that accessible. So one of the projects will be digitizing those and making them more readily available for people, and being able to share the information better online and through other resources. The survey work that I mentioned, the reconnaissance level survey, that's just a type of historic survey that's going to be completed in the residential areas south of downtown. The survey work was a project and an activity that was included in the historic preservation plan, and there's been some interest from the neighborhood group in that area to get involved in historic preservation work. So we're moving forward with that. The map kind of shows all of the existing properties that are on our historic resources inventory that'll be included in the survey work. And we're moving forward with an RFP this November and starting on that work early 2020. Just some of the other things we'll be doing in 2020. Again, we'll be promoting National Preservation Month in the month of May. We hope to continue our Historic Preservation Award program, which we did a couple years ago and awarded people that did good historic preservation projects. And then just focusing on outreach and getting information out there and raising public awareness about historic preservation. So with that, I'd answer any questions that you have for me at this point.
We'll go ahead and open for councilors. Any questions of Chuck and the Historic Landmark Committee? Zach, did you? I saw your hand. I don't know if you're.
Yeah, thanks, Chuck. Good work. Two things. One, you have on there an item, outreach to historic property owners. Now, you've had some trickiness with that prior to people not knowing that they were governed by this set of rules despite owning historic property. Can you touch on that and how it's gone and where you're going?
Yeah, so that comes up somewhat regularly. So our list of properties that are on our historic resources inventory is located at the city, and we have that information available, but it's not readily available to people if they're in the process of purchasing property. So one way we wanted to get that awareness out there and let people know that their property may be on the historic resources inventory was to do some outreach. Let them know what the status is, just so they're aware of that, and also just share some information about the program so that they understand what it is and also maybe some of the benefits of it as well. So that's in response to feedback that the committee's gotten over the few years I've been here, is to do that work and get that notification out there. They've also talked about, which we may not have funding for now, but doing something related to tying something to the deed that would make people aware of it. We haven't done like the legal research on what that process would be, but it's another conversation that the committee has had.
Sort of dovetailing with that, earlier this calendar year, there was an issue with non-compliance on a handrail nearby. Do you want to give the rest of the committee an update on that? Or the rest of the council an update on that?
Yeah, so there was a application that was reviewed for basically replacing a handrail on a porch with a material that was not the same material as the remainder of the porch. It was not approved by the Historic Landmarks Committee. It was actually appealed by the property owner to the Planning Commission, who upheld the Historic Landmarks Committee decision. And so the property owner has now is working towards replacing it because it had actually been installed before it was approved. So they're in the process of replacing it with the material that is allowed by our code. So,
thanks.
Other questions? Sal?
Yeah, is that materials issue a function of the city code, or is that required by state law?
It's in our current city code, which we've updated recently to be in compliance with the state administrative rules related to historic preservation and Goal 5 resources, which are one of the statewide planning goals. So they recently passed some new administrative rules that basically require you to cities to follow the Secretary of the Interior standards for historic preservation for any alterations to any designated historic resources. So our code is consistent with that rule, which follows the standards that have the Secretary of the Interior standards that have specific language about materials being consistent with what's used on the historic property.
So I guess my question is, does our city code go beyond what's required in the state law or the federal statute? Or, I mean, are we exceeding or are we meeting the standard? And the reason I'm asking, sorry to hijack this, but I mean, the reason that I'm asking is that I've met with a lot of business owners this past year, particularly related to downtown development. And there's a pretty strong consensus among folks that I've spoken with in the downtown community that it may be the case that the city ordinances that we have related to redevelopment is somehow impeding or making it more difficult to redevelop some of the historic properties on 3rd Street. And what we may be left with is, you know, knockdowns and facades. Specifically, I think people have kind of pointed to tension between the fire code requirements, which kind of are requiring newer and a lot of safety features that maybe didn't exist 100 years ago, and the historic landmarks code, which wants to preserve everything in kind of its original format. And I guess I'm wondering if it might not be a good idea to review, because I've heard several people say that it might be a good idea to review our city code to see if we're going a little further than we need to. And I also want to say 2 points. You have a lot of respect in our business community with the people that you work with for your thoroughness and your impartiality and fairness. So I wanted to make sure that I got that on the record. And the other thing I wanted to get on the record is that the Landmark Review Committee, the current iteration of that, also has a lot of respect from people in the community. But there have been concerns that maybe the city ordinance is going further than is needed by both the federal and the state law.
Chuck, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
So I think there might be, Counselor, I think there might be a couple of discussions that are overlapping with each other in that dialogue. So our historic preservation program is mirrored after the state OARs, Oregon Administrative Rules, that were passed. And they have there's a national standard for them. So the Secretary of Interior Standards for Rehabilitation and Historic Preservation is what we follow. That's what's in the state administrative rules, and it comes out of the National Park Service. It's all for exterior improvements only. So we're only reviewing what's on the outside of buildings in terms of changes for that. And I can't recall any project that has come even into the counter that's been looking at doing some exterior changes that hasn't been able to successfully navigate that process. Okay. I think what's happening is we have building code discussions. So there are property owners in the downtown area where they're thinking about how to reactivate a vacant space. So a second floor that's vacant right now, or a building that's entirely vacant. It has been vacant for a while, and to reactivate it does take some, is a building code issue in terms of bringing that building up to code with our building codes itself. And there are different ways that we are looking at those properties in terms of how to get them there. So these are buildings that, from a usually it's fire safety where there's a lot of issues, and seismic as well. Those are the two big ones and the two big investments that occur in those discussions. And how do we get these buildings that weren't built to a certain standard that we would like to see at a standard now in terms of protecting public safety, how to get them there, and also the investment that it requires to get there. And we have had some property owners who are struggling through that process. But that really is a fire code, building code issue, and not necessarily the historic preservation program. But I think people are getting those confused because it's a historic building that we're trying to get to a current code.
So I had a pretty lengthy conversation with the State Office of Historic Preservation, and they seem to suggest that there are elements of that do touch the fire code. And I mean, we can talk about that offline, but it seemed to me that it was not just about the exterior facade, at least in the conversation that I had with them.
Yeah, so there are two state programs, and we don't really have properties participating in that here actively right now, but there are two state programs that do look at interior rehab projects. There's benefits to that, so you can get tax credits if you want to participate in these historic preservation programs where the interior rehab is also regulated. We don't have any projects actively participating in that today. We haven't had any that have tried to participate in that in the 3 years I've been here, and I don't know if we've had them historically, but that is fairly common for large historic rehab projects because you can get a 20% tax credit. And so it's a way of financing those programs, but they are regulated in terms of the interior product as well. And there does become conflict with that historic regulation in terms of preserving the historic integrity and the building codes too. However, in the state of Oregon, we just recently adopted what's called the International Existing Building Code. They actually amended, this is probably more information than anybody here wants to know.
Please go on.
They amended the Chapter 34, which is our structural chapter of our building code, which is usually where you're finding the conflict in terms of the existing buildings and getting them up to current code levels. And they brought what's called the International Existing Building Code, elements of that into that particular chapter, so that presumably it will be easier for developers to rehab historic properties in such a way where you can, one, preserve the historic integrity, but still get to the same safety threshold that we're trying to get them to in terms of fire safety and seismic as well. Resiliency. But those are where we're seeing the most conflicts with the downtown buildings. We haven't really seen conflicts in terms of navigating the exterior historic preservation review. There has been some issues in terms of achieving some of the design requirements in the downtown design review overlay. And Historic Landmarks Committee reviews those as well, as you heard from Chuck, in terms of the first federal building. However, there's the ability to get waivers in that code, and there's no threshold for how many waivers. So like, I think the first federal project had 5 waivers in it. But it is a thoughtful discussion of going through, what does that waiver look like? How do we get there and still achieve the intent of the community in terms of the exterior environment downtown?
One last question, Mayor. Thanks.
Go ahead.
I'll wrap up. So I just want to make sure I'm understanding. So you're saying, as it relates to the exterior, for example, the railing that was mentioned earlier, that is required by the federal and the state statute, and our ordinance is not adding any more material requirements than already exist in those other 2 places.
So there isn't a federal statute. There is a federal standard. It's the Secretary of Interior Standards for Historic Preservation and Rehabilitation. The state of Oregon recently went through rulemaking for Goal 5, which is historic preservation, is part of that. And in their rulemaking, they established what they would like to see a standard at the local level, which is mimicking that Secretary of Interior standard. So we brought that into the local level as the standard here based on that. It's not a federal statute, but it is a recommendation out of the rulemaking that happened at the state level.
So it was a state recommendation, not a requirement.
Do you remember that entirely?
Yeah, it's required that if a community has designated resources, that they follow the Secretary of the Interior standards. So it comes through the state administrative rule.
So what we're doing in that regard is a requirement of the state administrative rules, as we're interpreting.
Correct. And we revised it slightly just to make it fit into our format, but we basically took those standards and put them into our code. So we didn't add any additional regulations to them.
Now, if I'm a residential property owner in the downtown core and I have a property that falls within this category of a historic building, what would be the cost for me to file an application to get a waiver?
I will look that up right now in my fee schedule.
You can text it to me separately. But where I'm going with this is I'm concerned that there might be residences, folk, like I have neighbors who are on that list that don't realize that they are.
Yeah.
And they might not, and so they, are going to be in a situation when they have to update, and I don't know, I guess.
So there is the ability, depending on what occurs, there is the ability to do it administer. So the cost, as you recall, when we went through the fee study for planning, we looked at a full cost recovery. There's the ability to do an administrative review based on the amount of change that's occurring to the landmark. And we make that decision, and the administrative review is less expensive than taking it to the Historic Landmarks Committee because of the amount of work involved in that. So there is that ability in terms of the extent of the changes that are being requested. Maintenance, obviously, is not a review. And what they're going for is their certificate of approval for any sort of alteration to the building. There is an issue with property owners knowing that it's a historic landmark. I wish it would transfer from the owner to the new owner, and so we are trying to figure out a method to get that recorded somehow in such a way that we can afford it, because there's a lot of landmarks on the list, but so that people do know when they're purchasing a property that this is a historic landmark. The other thing that's occurring in McMinnville is, as Chuck showed you, we in the 80s, went through a fairly comprehensive review of all properties that was 50 years old or older, and a lot of properties hit the landmarks list, and we have 4 categories for them, A, B, C, and D, and it's based on integrity, and then the review is different for A, Bs, and C, and Ds. So we are talking about revisiting that landmark inventory list in terms of all the properties that went on that, to make sure that the right properties are on it and they're in the right categorization, and then that those categories are being reviewed in the right way so that nobody's going through an undue process. This is all based on the community wants to preserve these historic landmarks, but we also want to make sure, it is something that is attainable and achievable.
All of that sounds like a really positive direction, Heather. I really appreciate your comments.
It does take time, though, and we're working through the process and trying to put that program together.
And that will be one of the outcomes of this work, is that the consultant, after doing the survey, that they provide us with recommendations for updates to our inventory. And we're starting with this area, and there's the ability to expand upon that in the future.
Thanks for those good questions, Sal. Any other questions? Wendy?
Chuck, I thank you for all your great work on this committee. It seems like you guys are really doing a lot of work forward, both for our understanding of what we have and also communication with citizens. My question actually relates with that, with regards to what have you found to be the most effective way to get information out to citizens? Have you made that push yet? Or have you not tried to engage, other than This Place Matters, which you guys have started a little bit? It looks like there's a few blogs on there. But
yeah,
is that for later on once you've done this survey?
Yeah, we haven't done a lot of outreach. I think we're going to do the targeted one with the property owners this coming year, continue with social media to try and do that. The committee's talked about having presence at events like the farmers market, and we're going to talk with the MDA about potentially having some materials available there. But yeah, once we do survey work, we've been engaged with the Sodan neighborhood group, and hopefully they can help us kind of spread the word of that work in that neighborhood. So just getting outreach that way, to partnering with people when we can. So yeah, we're continuing to work on that.
Okay. And I'm sorry, if I can just add to that, the committee has 3 goals, I think, in their work plan. Yeah. One of them is education and outreach. And so when we apply for the Certified Local Government Grant each biennium, we have an element in there for education and outreach. So this year, we received the grant and we're matching it and we're able to do the survey work, but there's also in their education funds to do a couple of things in terms of trying. The other thing that's going on in McMinnville is there isn't a one-stop resource where, let's say I'm a property owner who's bought a historic landmark, where I can look up information about the property and understand why it's a landmark and what the what's integral about it that I want to save as I'm thinking about making investments in my property. We have them in binders underneath our counter, and that's the only way we have them. So what we're trying to do is set up, use some funds to try and get these resources in a way that people have access to them, and also to do education about the value of these historic properties in McMinnville and the story that they're sharing in terms of how the community has developed. And if you recall, last grant round, we looked at the northern neighborhood just north of downtown, and we learned that a lot of the historic properties there were homes of merchants who owned businesses downtown, and there was a direct correlation with those landmarks and the landmark businesses that were occurring downtown as well. So they're great McMinnville stories that we want to make sure we get out for everyone.
Yeah, I think, and one of the thoughts behind that question is, I know sometimes we struggle to get the word out to everybody because there isn't one place you can put it that will reach everybody, we've found. So I wondered if you guys had been thinking about that and come up with ideas, and it sounds like you have some ideas of how to have the information out there where it will reach everybody who would want to know about it, and hopefully broadly. And it sounds like having that resource, the other thought that I had was we really should engage the real estate community who's going to be, showing houses and things like that when we're thinking about education, because they're talking about a lot of people and they're considered experts. And so if they have the tools and we get them, connecting people with the tools, it'd be really important for them to understand how to use that tool and that they're directing people to look up information on those tools. So.
Yes, and one of the last pieces we want to do, and this may help a little bit with the conversations Councilor Peralta has been having, is so I've worked in historic preservation for many years in many different communities, and there's always this sort of urban myth that historic rehab is so much more expensive than new construction, but it's really finding the right team to do the work. And so one of the things that we want to do is set up a resource center where we can have the right, contractors who understand historic preservation work and architects who understand historic preservation, whatever we need to do to sort of set up the right team to do the work so that people can access that information. Because it's when you're bringing someone in who doesn't have experience with that or knowledge of the codes that we were just talking about, it can be a struggle.
Yeah, that's a great idea. And continuing education classes for realtors would be a good idea.
Thank you, Wendy. Any other comments or questions? Seeing none, again, I've had the opportunity to go to a number of the committee meetings and just happened to go to the big discussion that we had on the building downtown where we got a real history, about 2.5 hours worth of history. But I was so impressed with the committee of their strength and their understanding and their knowledge that could ask the right questions. And so, as Sal had mentioned, take back to the committee how much we appreciate the good works they're doing. I'm impressed with every member of that committee and what they bring to the plate. Having interviewed a number of those for those committee assignments, there are a lot of qualified individuals, and I think we have the cream of the crop on the committee. And then again, just another shout out to planning and how, Chuck, you're taking that role of leadership and providing direction for that group. Again, I was very, very impressed of each of the committee meetings that I've been a part of.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Chuck.
And Mark, again, is here today. I want to thank him. He's been a great committee member, so
absolutely.
I'll take that back to the rest of the group, too.
Yeah. Thank you, Chuck. Okay, that takes us to advice and information items, and we're going to depart a little bit. And Jeff, I'm going to turn a little time over to you. We have a new employee that we need to introduce.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the City Council. We'll do this just a little out of order since we have a new member of the executive team here. Jennifer Cuellar-Smith is our new finance director. She's here 1 day a week, this week, last week, and next week, but she'll start full-time the week of Thanksgiving, and she and Elizabeth have been coordinating her transition to give her a chance to experience a broad range of McMinnville-centric activities. And tonight she gets to attend her first council meeting. So I want to welcome Jennifer to the team and give her the chance to say a few words to you. Thanks, Jennifer.
Put her on the spot.
Well, I'm just so thrilled to join the team, and just there are some great folks in finance and also the courts that I'll be working with directly and getting to know colleagues and the governing body. Just thanks so much for giving me the opportunity, and I look forward to getting to know folks and responding to questions and meeting your needs as the months unfold. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome, Jennifer.
Yeah, absolutely. Jennifer, on the way into the building, I ran into Tanya, and I guess we're starting that audit process as you're coming on board, and so what a welcome. You're not only asked to speak your first night here, but the auditors were in town too, so welcome. With that being said, let's go ahead and we'll open and do our reporting of committee and board assignments. And I think I'll start with Zach, and we'll work this way this time. I think I started with Adam last time, didn't I?
We'll never know.
Never know, okay.
Thank you very much for this opportunity to go first tonight. Historic Landmarks Committee meeting has not met. We'll meet this Thursday, but you just heard a rousing update on how they did all year long, and couldn't agree more. Landscape Committee meets tomorrow, so my next council meeting, which is canceled thanks to Thanksgiving, will be packed with updates. What else do I have? Kids on the Block. I'm still excited for that joint school board city council work session. That's definitely going to happen. Looking forward to it. And I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Zach. Remy?
Thank you. So as you heard earlier, our last two Housing for Homeless subcommittee meetings were canceled. However, the work that is coming out of those has still, or some of the work that's been coming out of those still has been moving forward, specifically project concerning taking county property tax foreclosures and turning them into safe houses. That project is still moving forward. The McMinnville Affordable Housing Task Force did meet. We actually had an extended meeting, and our not only members but also other attendees very graciously stayed for a meeting that started at 8 and went till 11. So we thank them for their time in that. And at that meeting, first we had a presentation from Oregon Housing and Community Services to help us better understand some potential opportunities. And then we did two other activities at the meeting. One was that we again did a map review of the city, and the reason that we keep doing that activity is because we're really looking for opportunities where we can increase affordable housing in reality, where we can try to leverage getting some more units on the ground. At the last number of meetings, we've had a very strong presence from the Housing Authority of Yamhill County, and that's been fantastic. And then from that one action item, my favorite thing that happens at a meeting happened, which is that everybody got a homework assignment to take with them. So we were sure to continue working in between our meetings. And then we also started working on our action plan revisions, which will come before you. The other thing that, there were a couple other things that happened this week. The only one I can speak to is that the city of McMinnville was able to act as host to the Department of Land Conservation and Development, who came down, and we had attendees here from a number of different cities, and they were here to help explain and also to take feedback back regarding House Bill 2003 and House Bill 2001, both of which are bills designed to address in one way or another affordable housing. And then there was also a community meeting on the floating zone, but I wasn't able to attend that, so I won't try to report on it. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you, Remy.
Oh, and we have openings on the affordable housing.
We do have openings, at least two, right?
Yes. So please, if you're interested in getting involved in solutions and affordable housing, contact our planning department.
If you have a contractor background, we're very, very interested in you.
Yeah, it's still open. The position is unfilled, so positions. We are the one committee that is able to boast that we do have a youth representative, though.
Absolutely.
And he's very engaged.
And he's very effective.
It's fantastic.
Nate?
Wendy?
Great.
Speaking of that,
Oh, not Nate, actually.
Raise the roof on that one.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
did we Did we capture any of those, the youth that came in here, by the way, for, I heard you mention to them that we have openings on committees.
Like capture the flag capture?
Capture, is there any traction? Did you connect with their teacher or anything?
We did connect with the assistant principal over at McMinnville High School about opportunities at the city for youth liaisons, and we have been in further conversation. It's going back and forth right now, so they're trying to get it into the classrooms. None of those individual students have contacted us, but we're hoping that the administration is going to help us send the information out into the classrooms, and we'll get some hits from that.
Cool.
But we have opportunities for anybody interested.
Yeah, that's great. All right, thank you for the update. So we did have a MURAC meeting, and we have our chair here today from our MURAC meeting, and it was a great meeting. We actually took a look at our, and we're not in the process of doing our budget for next year yet, but just kind of as a check-in, we took a look at what our numbers look like and what we had budgeted for, what we have spent, what we had talked about spending, that we haven't spent. What we spent a lot of time looking at was there are a few projects that for other reasons have not moved forward, wayfinding, rooftop lighting. We have been moving forward on property assistance and the 3rd Street Streetscape project. Both of those have been moving forward. We talked about why those other 2 projects have not been moving forward and what we should do about it. The wayfinding, it just has fallen off the radar of the Visit McMinnville. We talked a little bit about what we should do about that or not do about that. I think what we decided to do was just circle back with Visit McMinnville. Scott had taken that on. And then the rooftop lighting, because of the transitions in the downtown McMinnville rooftop lighting, which we are involved in, but not supposed to be the one pushing it forward. And Heather, I think, was going to, said that she could provide some structure around that if we chose to do that. And I think the committee had a consensus that we did want to proceed with that and see how we can encourage that forward. The rooftop lighting project is to do the roof line of 3rd Street, and we were going to do it in collaboration with the Downtown Association. We also talked with Shay Pack, who it's a project that's going in on Lafayette, is part of the Alpine Granary District. We had seen him come in before. He's looking to put in a grouping of restaurants there on Lafayette, off of Lafayette, and he was hoping to be able to do some kind of a drive-through in the back, so still pedestrian-oriented. Currently, the gateway area does not allow that, so we're considering whether or not it would make sense with some special language to encourage still high level of pedestrian traffic to have also the ability to do some type of drive-through, which would make it more economically feasible. The committee seemed to be in support of that because of the nature of Lafayette and it being a little bit different than the nature of Alpine. So we didn't make any decisions at this point. It was more informational. He showed us an updated plan, and we talked a little bit about the specifics of that, what it would look like and what it would do for traffic on Lafayette. So it looks like we will be looking at some kind of an amendment to what it currently says you can and can't do based on what he's giving us feedback, what makes it economically feasible to develop those properties. And then we have some openings, right, Heather? We have 3, 2, 3, MURAC? Oh, closed. Okay, and we have applicants. So we have openings, but they're filled. So they're going to be filled. So I think that's it. Our next meeting is in December.
Thank you, Wendy. Adam?
We had an airport commission meeting last week, and I was out of state, so maybe Mike could speak to that a little bit when it gets around to him. And YCOM, we meet on Thursday. YCOM, the E-board did vote last meeting to try and collect some airport air show fees from the city since the air show didn't reimburse. So that's still up in the air. And I know Jeff is working with Matt and Rich on that. So I know YCOM will be eager to hear what comes of that, and maybe the air show comes back around and reimburses Wycombe for their time. That's all I got.
Thank you, Adam. Sal?
Thanks. Thank you, Mayor. Just one comment apropos of Wendy's presentation. I actually did a walk down on Alpine with a property owner who was expressing concern that the foot traffic that we hope to have there, and maybe we will have in 20 years, hasn't materialized, and it's negatively impacting some of the core, what we kind of perceive to be anchor businesses down there. So I think anything you can do to bring more gravity of business investment down there, even if you have to make some changes on the committee, I would encourage it based on the feedback that I've gotten between the last meeting. I just wanted to pass that along. Council of Governments Executive Committee met last week. They voted to be the agency record for the new Marion Polk Continuum of Care, which we had endorsed Yamhill County participating in, but Yamhill County is not currently choosing to do that. Newburgh Mayor Rick Rogers asked if there was still a possibility of including Yamhill County in the continuum, and Commissioner Casey Kula, who was a participant in the meeting, also said that he was interested in pursuing that because he's not been able to get support from the current board to do more on homelessness in our community. So that was met pretty neutrally by the board. I think there was not a lot of huge appetite from Marion and Polk at this time to join that continuum, but that may have been partly due to some perceived reluctance at the Yamhill County board. Earlier this fall, changing gears, earlier this fall, I pointed out that Multnomah County and Portland have both adopted laws to regulate contributions and expenditures in city elections. This past year, we saw an organization spend more than $300,000 on signature gathering to influence a recent city election. They sent out a bunch of mailers that appeared to come from maybe different sources. That might have been confusing to some voters. So I've encouraged us as a board to adopt a new ordinance to address campaign finance disclaimers and disclosures, essentially modeled after the Portland statute. Their statute also includes contribution limits that are not currently being enforced, but likely will start to be enforced after 2020 if voters pass SJR 18, which was a constitutional amendment referral. So I think we should take action on campaign finance, at least the disclaimers, probably contribution limits as well, knowing that voters are likely to pass that in 2020. And even if they don't, that would just be kind of held in abeyance. And I would say even though the contribution limits in Portland are not being enforced, a lot of candidates are voluntarily adhering to them, which is interesting.
I just want to say that I totally agree with Sal on this. I think it would be very important to do this.
Thank you. Thank you, Kelly. And then the last thing, and this isn't directly related to city business, but 2 meetings ago, I think we had several people come in and ask us to do more to address climate policy. I just wanted to make a note that last week I made a presentation to the Oregon Board of Forestry about a program to increase investment for afforestation, reforestation on private lands, and to set up basically to have the legislative authority already in the Department of Forestry to set up and market a protocol for carbon sequestration. It happened in the 1990s and they haven't taken advantage of it in the 25 years since. So I think they already have the legislative authority to do some of that work. So I presented that to the Board of Forestry last week, and we'll be meeting with their Department of Treasury and Forestry this month to try and move that project forward. Totally volunteer thing, but I just wanted folks in the community to be aware that that conversation is happening.
Thank you, Sal. Kelly?
Again, I just want to totally endorse what Sal suggested with the financial reporting. I think it's important. I think it might have helped us some in the last election. Okay, for me, let's see. We have evidently 3 openings on the budget committee, and we are reopening that. So please, if you know anyone who's good at numbers and is interested in city government, we'd certainly like to get their name and get them listed. I have one person already. Visit McMinnville, we met last week, and had a discussion on the economic development process in regard to the urban growth boundary PAC discussion, and I felt like we made some pretty good decisions. It was an exciting meeting. Tomorrow there are two meetings in regard to the PAC, one at 3:30 to 4:30, and I'm going to let, I think this has more to do with the buildable lands impact, correct? And then the one from 4:30 to 6:30 is dealing more with the totally wrong, economic development, and also planning for, how the lands are used in regard to how we're going to parse certain things. And I'm blowing this again, is in regard to governmental. I think there's like 5 different points and I'm blowing it. So I'll turn it over to Heather and let her give it. But it's an important conversation, and if you can come, I'd advise you just come to the 3:30, 4:30 meeting just to get kind of an overview on it.
Right.
Yeah, so this is the project advisory committee that's working on the public lands and employment land needs for the city for both the 20-year planning horizon and the 50-year planning horizon. So tomorrow's meeting, we'll be looking at our buildable lands inventory maps, and then we're towards the end of our public land discussion. We have visited with all the different agencies in McMinnville about their future public land needs, including the city and its departments. And then we'll be looking at employment lands and what it means in terms of ensuring that we can implement our economic development strategic plan and ensure we have enough employment land to employ future residents in McMinnville. So 3:30 to 6:30 over at the police department.
Thank you, Kelly. From my perspective, this last week on Thursday, we had our Mid-Willamette Advisory Transportation Committee meeting. In that meeting, we set out our priority for 2020, which is the Newburgh-Dundee bypass. So that's their number one priority for the 3 counties in the COG as it relates to transportation. Along with that, the OTC, the Oregon Transportation Commission, will be meeting their second meeting under the new leadership November 21st down at Spirit Mountain. I will be attending that on behalf of the Mid-Willamette Valley Transportation Committee. Also, I will be presenting for the Newburgh-Dundee bypass and updating our information to the OTC members on our needs there. This Friday, we have the County Housing Solution Meeting. It will be held in Newburgh at Providence. 4 o'clock. I'm going to be out of town that day, so if anyone would like to attend that, they're back up and going from that perspective. 2 dates that I would ask you to just be aware of. You have an envelope at your seat that talks about the local government's dinner, and McMinnville will be hosting that on November 21st. That is going to be at the Golden Valley at 6 o'clock. Many of you have been to those, but with us hosting it, just if you're able to put that on your calendar, it would be nice to have us represented as the county representatives are coming into our community. I share that our city holiday dinner and festivities will be December 13th. I get that out on your calendar early so that you possibly could attend that and meet with staff and just have a good evening of fun. And we'll have the casino there again, so there's a lot of fun with that. Let's go to department heads. Chief? Amy, welcome.
Thank you. I have just one thing. We have an opening currently on our day medic and have offered a position to firefighter paramedic Sarah Caligari. She'll be starting with us at the end of the month.
Thank you for updating us. Eileen? No? And Jennifer, welcome. Anything that you'd like to share from a department head standpoint? Great, thank you. Mike?
Thank you, Mayor. Just following up on Adam's question regarding the airport commission meeting last week. It was mostly just an informational meeting. There weren't any action items on the agenda other than approval of the previous meeting's minutes. It had been since July since the commission had met. They meet every other month, so they had missed the September meeting with the lack of agenda items. Mostly just an informational update. Potcake Aviation's representative presented an operational update. Recently had some lights on the main runway that were out and had electricians out troubleshooting that and have those repaired and back up and operating. Have been sharing lots of information about pavement strength based on planes through pavement, and they have some new staff at Potcake, and they're much more aware of where heavy equipment should be and shouldn't be. I provided several informational updates regarding work at the airport. The runway apron project, that's our next capital project, did not receive FAA grant funding for 2020. So our joint conference call with FAA and the Oregon Department of Aviation revealed that they'll be trying to obtain that funding for us in 2021. That's about a $2.1 million construction project. Our annual allotment of FAA dollars is about $150,000. So we either pay the difference or we wait until there's some discretionary appropriation funds available to fund the project. So we're targeting 2021 for that work. That'll have a domino effect on pushing our master plan out. The current plan for the airport layout plan update is in 2024. Again, we have to accrue sufficient funds to fund that effort, which is likely about $500,000 worth of work. So, reported on the fact that we had a recent land use compliance inspection by FAA staff out of Seattle. They pick 2 airports a year in the region, and we drew the lucky straw this year. I spent most of a day with them in September. They've provided the results of that inspection. There are a couple of action items on my to-do list. I need to seek interim approval for our Comcast lease and our Oregon State Police lease, because those are classified as non-aviation leases. So I have a FAA process I need to go through, and then the expectation would be when the master plan's updated, we'll designate those lease areas as non-aviation so that they'll be in compliance with our airport layout plan. And then I need to produce what's known as an Exhibit A, which is a property map of the airport that basically documents the history of the acquisition of property parcels, and then also documents the receipt of federal funds over time. And that becomes the foundation or basis for property decisions that the FAA blesses that the city may have regarding the airport in the future. So I can either do that as part of the master plan update or as part of a future FAA funded project. They'll fund the consultant to put together that Exhibit A property map for us. They've also indicated we should update some lease language, so I'll be working on that and revisit our minimum commercial standards, which the Airport Commission has wanted to do for some time anyway, so we'll put that on their 2020 to-do list. Other than that, I reported on, we've had several parties interested in constructing new hangars at the airport recently, so hopefully some of those will move forward, and we'll have leases in front of the commission and then subsequently the council in 2020. Staff is working on the bid documents to refurbish the Jet A tank. You'll recall the trials and tribulations of refurbishing and then ultimately replacing the 100 low lead tank. So we're doing our due diligence to make sure we have the proper process in place to deal with the Jet A tank. And then in the budget is some funding to remove some tree obstructions that are in a couple of the runway approaches that we've been notified by the FAA. So they've changed some flight approaches. It's not impacting the use of the airport at this point, but we need to get out ahead of that so that it doesn't impact use of the airport in the future. So mostly information sharing. Pretty short meeting. The last thing on their list was Jody Christensen's last airport commission meeting was that evening. She's decided not to reapply for reappointment. And so we do have one opening on the Airport Commission. That application period is closed. And with Rebecca's help, we've got, I think we're interviewing 5 candidates next week.
Right.
Adam and the mayor and I. So that's what I know about Airport Commission.
Thank you, Mike. Heather?
So just to follow up on the committee openings, we advertised for 5 of the committees that we staff in Planning Commission, some openings. We still have 2 openings on the Planning Commission. We have an opening for Ward 1 and an opening for an at-large Planning Commissioner. And so I would encourage anybody who's interested in participating in how development occurs in McMinnville and what our future will look like in terms of development to be part of the Planning Commission, because that will be our discussions over the next several years. And it's a great commission to be on if you want to get actively involved in city leadership in terms of how decisions are made and advising to city council. We have the youth liaison opportunity available on 4 of the committees. Our Historic Landmarks Committee that you heard about tonight has an opening for youth liaison. The Landscape Review Committee, the McMinnville Urban Renewal Advisory Committee, which gets to make decisions on spending money on projects. That's always a fun committee to be on. And then the Planning Commission also has an opening on it as well. And these are opportunities for youth to participate and be a city-appointed committee member and actually make meaningful impact in terms of the dialogue and decisions made at these committee levels that could impact the city in which these students live. And it's also a great resume builder for students in terms of moving forward into adult life. So we encourage people to get involved and participate in that.
Thank you, Heather. We recognize Rebecca that's filling in as our city recorder as we're going through the process of hiring a new recorder, but thank you for all of your additional duties and help. You've been tremendous. Again, we welcome Walt this evening to be sitting with us, and then I'll turn it over to Jeff. Do you have any comments?
Just one item, since we won't be having any more council meetings the month of November, I'll let you know that I was appointed to the host committee for the ICMA conference in 2020, which happens in Toronto. So I'll be at a host committee planning meeting, Toronto 6th, 7th, and 8th, so Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. I wish you all a safe and happy Thanksgiving between now and when next we meet as a body. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Again, we look into additional information. We have the October building report in your packet. Our last item this evening is the consent agenda. We're considering the minutes of the July 23rd, 2019 City Council works session and regular meeting. Is there any councilor that would like to have this removed off the consent agenda? Hearing none, I'll take a motion.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved by Remy, seconded by Sal. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? This consent agenda passes unanimously 6-0. With that being said, that concludes our meeting this evening, so I will adjourn the meeting.